Good morning, everyone. This is Father Nate, missionary priest in Italy, and thanks for joining us today, March 13th, on No Greater Delight, our podcast on Marian feasts and Marian meditations. Well, today we have a great number of feasts, so we'll get started with Our Lady of the Empress in Rome. We think around 593, right? So the Abbot Orsini writes this. He says, a tradition records that this image spoke to St. Gregory the Great in the year 593, right? So Salus Populi Romani literally means health or salvation, or if you want to say like protectress of the Roman people, right? Now the title goes back to the Emperor Constantine the Great and the Edict of Milan, when after Christians were no longer persecuted, the phrase became another of the many Marian titles that they used for Mary, the Mother of God, right? The icon Salus Populi Romani, or Our Lady of the Empress, is one of many images believed to have been painted by St. Luke. Now, according to tradition, John took in the Blessed Virgin Mary after Jesus had ascended into heaven. She had very few personal belongings, but among them was a table built by Christ himself when he was working in the carpenter shop with St. Joseph. St. Luke, yielding to the repeated requests of pious virgins, painted a portrait of Mary using the tabletop as his canvas, right? As the portrait was being painted, St. Luke listened carefully as the Queen of Heaven spoke of her son's life, facts that St. Luke recorded in his Gospel, right? So the image is surprisingly large, right? It's 5 feet high by 3 3/4 feet, right? I mean, that seems huge unless you recall that, it was painted on a tabletop, right? So this is very interesting. The Virgin holds a mappa in her right hand, which is an imperial symbol meant to depict her as queen, or in the Roman times, as the Empress. The icon is said to have come to Rome from Crete in 590, when Pope St. Gregory the Great was pope. And according to tradition, he went out upon the Tiber in his own vessel to greet the icon, right? 3 years later, he had the icon carried through Rome in solemn procession as all prayed to the Mother of God for an end to the plague that had been devastating the people of Rome, right? And so this is very beautiful, right? When the icon of Salus Populi Romani, with a prayerful group, neared Hadrian's mausoleum, just as they reached there, an angel believed to be St. Michael appeared. He was holding a sword of vengeance over the city, and above him the Pope saw the Blessed Virgin seated upon a throne above the angels, right? So, since the year 1613, the icon Salus Populi Romani has been kept in the altar tabernacle of the Capella Paulina that was created for it, right? Known in English as Our Lady's Chapel, right? The Basilica of St. Mary Major, where it can be seen, is one of the 4 ancient churches of Rome and Marian shrines under the special protection of the Pope. It's a very beautiful story today. We also celebrate the Devpeteruf, Mother of God, in Batyushkov, in Dmitrov, Moscow, Russia, right? It's an image that shows the mother and child cheek to cheek, as in the famous icon of Our Lady of Vladimir, right? Tradition holds that this icon miraculously appeared on February 29th, 1392, which would be March 13th in the modern calendar, right? However, there's no information available about its modern history, nor about its name. The earliest written record places the image in the stone church of St. Nicholas in 1666, in Batyoshkov, a village about 35 miles from Moscow, right? So in the 1930s, attackers killed the watchman and stole the icon in its jeweled sheath. The image was later found in the mud nearby, stripped of its ornaments, right? The priest returned the picture to a place of honor in the church. But in 1939, the Soviet regime turned the church into a cow barn for a collective farm, where its icons were cut up and burned, right? The building, later restored with blue onion domes, returned to the Russian Orthodox Church in 1997, right? And so at the request of a parishioner, and thanks for prayers, answered prayers, an iconographer, you can decide where to put the emphasis on that, painted a new image, right? In 1999. In 2001, a boy came out of a coma after his mother prayed before the image. So that's very beautiful. Also today, in 1921, we have the blessing of the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception in Georgetown, Guyana, right? Also sometimes known as Brighton Cathedral, right? Because it's the corner of Brighton and Stabroek, right? So the first Catholic church at Brighton was built in 1819, and the foundation stone was laid by the governor d'Urban on March 12th, 1825, right? But originally the church was called Christ Church, but renamed around 1847 as the Church of the Resurrection, right? And so a more grandiose structure was built completely out of wood 2 decades later, and it was called the finest structure in British Guyana, until it was completely destroyed by a fire on March 7th, 1913, right? Well, 2 days later, March 9th, 1913, the Catholic mayor convened a meeting to decide to start fundraising efforts for a grand new cathedral, right? That cathedral took over 10 years to build, and it was made of reinforced concrete, right? Though incomplete, the cathedral was opened and blessed by Bishop Galton, the Jesuit, on this day, March 13th, 1921. The entire cathedral was later opened on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, December 8th, 1925. And last but not least, because what would a day be without a Marian feast in Italy, we celebrate Madonna della Rosa, San Vito al Tagliamento in Pordenone, right? This actually recalls the transfer, the changing, the movement of the image of Our Lady of Madonna di Rosa, Our Lady of the Roses. So Our Lady spoke to a small girl named Maria and said, I'm not good, io non sto bene in questo luogo. I'm not good in this place, right? Because they say so many blasphemies against my son. Tell your father to come and bring me to a church that's on a street that has lots of visitors. And so that's what they did. So that is what we are celebrating today, March 13th, in the Marian world. For today's reading from the Imitation of Mary by Alexander de Rouville, we continue with Book 3, which considers Mary's life and virtues from the death of Jesus until his ascension. And today we'll consider Chapter 14, Zeal for God's Glory and the Salvation of Souls. And this is, it's sort of a conversation, but really it's just almost a monologue. The believer speaks, and then Mary responds, right? The believer. Holy Virgin, I love to think of you amid the little flock of faithful servants who gathered around you after the ascension of Jesus and the descent of the Holy Spirit. It was the efforts and preaching of the apostles that brought them there. In you they had a most tender and zealous mother. Who can say how much you did for the young church of Jerusalem? When the apostles set out to win the world for Christ, your prayers went with them everywhere, helping to support them in their labors and to overcome all obstacles and dangers. In order to preserve the faith and virtues of the believers among whom you lived, you zealously tried to win their confidence. How could you but obtain it from all who were fortunate enough to be near you? They could never sufficiently admire the affection Jesus' mother had for them, the free and ready access they had to you, and your respect for them. If your high dignity, your virtue, and the enlightenment the Holy Spirit gave you won everyone's respect, your great goodness drew all hearts. A mere glance at an afflicted person sufficed to make all his troubles easier to bear. Your words, burning with a heavenly fire and endowed with heavenly power, softened the hardest hearts, inflamed the most lukewarm, encouraged the most timid, and gave a new ardor to the most fervent. If your zealous soul was grieved by the persecutions the Christians of Jerusalem had to bear, it could also find consolation in the progress the apostles were making among the Gentiles, especially that of St. John before your very eyes at Ephesus, where you found refuge in his home for some years. You found great joy in that progress, for everything that contributed to the glory of your God's church was of highest concern to you. Queen of the Apostles, obtain for me but a single spark of that sacred fire that consumed you for the glory of Jesus. Obtain for me, too, the grace to make others honor and love him. Mary, my child, how pleased I am with your desires. For zeal for Christ's glory must always mark the true Christian. It is as necessary for a Christian as the love from which it springs. Many consider it a mark of apostolic men alone. In fact, however, it must characterize every state. All Christians are obligated to win hearts to God through good example and appropriate advice, through words of comfort to the afflicted, and, above all, through prayer. Frequently the conversion of a sinner is due to the size of a zealous soul, unknown to the world, which the soul raises to God in solitude. At certain moments of fervor, you long to be among the pagans and to be toiling for their conversion. Holy desires, yes, but necessarily ineffective. You are looking far off for something quite near to you. Your duty is to glorify God by consoling the poor, instructing the ignorant, raising your children as pious Christians, fulfilling the obligations of your state, and leading others to fulfill theirs. Think of your neighbor's salvation, and bear always in mind that for his sake, Jesus gave his life. Many Christians will be punished for having neglected the good they could have done, and for not having prevented the sins of others when they could have. If you love the Lord, my child, you cannot better prove your love than by making others bless and love him. God has so few good servants. Give him the joy not only of being glorified in you, but also of seeing you use all the means your circumstances offer to glorify him.
Thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoyed our Marian podcast. As St. John Paul II teaches us, from Mary we learn to love Christ, her Son, the Son of God. Through her intercession, may we grow ever closer to him. We encourage you to share this with a loved one or friend and help spread our devotion to Mary. Thank you, and God bless.